Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On this episode, we're driving the Turd Bird because we finished the cheapest 5-lug swap. The cheapest 5-lug swap budget did take a bit of a kick to the tchotchkes, but we're gonna go over that. Stay tuned. So I'm going to show you what we have here and what parts we have. As you can see here, I have the master cylinder and proportioning valve off of the car. I actually ended up having to cut those bottom fittings to get them off. The small line is for the front brake on the passenger side. The large line goes to the rear of the car for both rear brakes. So I'm not 100% that this is all of the solution, but this is the best plan I have and what I've been able to figure out. And this is also what took a while. This is the things they don't show you in the 5-lug swap videos. So we ran into some snags. I tried to do the right thing and plan ahead. And so what I did was, when I bought the rear end out of the car at the junkyard, I also took the master cylinder and proportioning valve and the lines that connect them from the donor car. This mounts to the inner fender apron, same as the stock one does on the Thunderbird. These are all the stock Thunderbird parts here. So in theory, I bolt this stuff on, adapt whatever lines are on the car to fit these guys, and boom, I have a brake system working as it was intended to work on the donor car. Now, from what I can figure, this line is responsible for front brakes. You can see it comes here, and that's on this side of the proportioning valve. So this, basically, if you drew a line through the middle of it, this part of it's responsible for front brakes, this part of it's responsible for rear brakes. Now, front brakes get full brake line pressure. The rear brakes actually get a reduced amount of pressure to keep them from locking up, because on a car, your front brakes do about 70% of the braking, rear brakes do about 30%. So this is what I've come up with. This should all bolt right into the car, no problem. Now, this line here, which is one of the front brake lines, this is the other front brake line, this has a huge fitting. It's basically 12 mil. And I could not find this fitting at the parts store. So this is what I come up with. This adapter, piece of adapter line here, is 3/16 brake line. So what I'm going to do is just snip the line, take that fitting off. Here is my front line I've taken off of the car, which I had already modified for the front SN Mustang brakes. And what I'm going to do is cut that fitting off, put this correct fitting on there, and redo a bubble flare on there. So that gets me this connection. Now, when I took this off the donor car, I just cut the lines, so I still have the fittings. These are bubble flares. The original stuff was all a regular flare. Sorry, that's a bubble flare that I made. This is the regular flare end. That's what a regular flare looks like. And that is what a bubble flare looks like. So, anyway, I kept those fittings. So, the line that goes to the other front brake on the car will fit this fitting that I kept. So I will slide this guy on there and make a new bubble flare on that fitting, and that'll go right in there. Now the rear is where I ran into issues, because the rear line on the car for the drum brakes is very large. I think it's 5/16, which would never fit this, and I don't think it needs to be that big. I'm not 100% on it, but I think drum brakes require bigger lines because the little cylinder actually requires more fluid, if that makes sense. Anyway, I don't know totally the science. I understand how most of this works, but I don't know the engineering and stuff behind it. So I'm just taking and copying everything from the donor car. So what I'm gonna do is I had found a couple adapters that adapted down to basically fit that, but I was gonna end up stacking adapters and this whole, and I thought no, because that line doesn't need to be that big anyway for the new brakes, because the lines that go into the caliper splitter, this is where lines come in from the master cylinder and then go into this caliper, and then the little splitter sends across the back end of the car to the other caliper. These are only, you know, whatever the metric equivalent of 3/16 lines are, and luckily I still have these fittings, so I'm going to make new lines for these also. Those are only that big. I don't need the big huge line. So other than having some messy cobbled together adapter mess, what I decided to do was just go ahead and order a whole new set of 25-foot roll of 3/16 line. And you might think this looks a little weird. This is NICOP line, which I've been wanting to try for a long time. It's supposed to be super easy to work with, easy to bend and flare because it's softer than traditional steel line, which this is traditional steel line here with the green coating on it. Tends to kink when you bend it, just kind of tough to work with. You can see how, like, I can't bend that guy with my hand at all. And now the nickel copper line, look at how easy that is to bend, and it doesn't really kink. Been wanting to try it for a long time. So let me show you what else I have. This here is what came with the donor rear end as far as rotors. Now, do you see a problem here? These are right and left rotors. Let me know when you see what the issue is. I don't know what the heck happened. If you look at the thickness of that rotor and then that one, my guess is this thinner rotor was so worn that the pads ground into the metal, and then somebody went ahead and machined it and did a brake job on it anyway. I didn't measure it, but my guess is if I did, it would be way under the minimum allowable thickness, and then what happens is they warp. You cut them that thin, you get some heat in them, they warp because they can't dissipate the heat. So that stuff is all junk. Anyway, so what I did was I ordered a bunch of the parts I needed for the car from Rock Auto, to include power stop brake set for the rear of this Mustang axle. And much better deal than you can get at the parts store, because it comes with Power Stop Evolution ceramic pad set. So there, these are little shims and hardware, and 2 brand new rotors for this Mustang rear end. So all of this was only like 60 or 70 bucks. So there is complete new brake system other than calipers for the rear of the car. So let's get on it. We're gonna start with fabricating a new front brake line for the driver's front caliper, which is gonna be easy enough. Cutting the end of the line, take this fitting off, sacrifice this line to steal the fitting from it. And then we're going to find out how easy or not easy NICOP line, the nickel copper new line, is to work with. I have my SN95 proportioning valve here, and I have removed the factory rear brake line, and I have reflared my original front line with the metric bubble fitting on there that fits this proportioning valve. That one I already flared in the vise. I showed you that. That's the new NICOP line running down. So it runs down the K-member, around, and then down the passenger side frame rail. There's all the old line right there. Honestly, my plan was to try to get the old line out in one piece and bend the new line to match it and then put the new line in. That's not how it went, but It's easy enough to figure out where it needs to go because it follows the K-member where the front brake line goes from the passenger side. So it's super easy, and then it runs down the frame rail. You can see right back where to put it. You don't need to copy the old line like I thought you would. So I just ended up cutting it out in a couple pieces because it was such a bad word to try and get out of there. So anyway, I'm going to get that new line all snipped in there and then cut it because I just have the excess hanging out the back right now. So I'll cut it back in there where it needs to stop, and then I'll show you how I laid it all in there, and then we'll work on making the rear lines. Okay, brakes are done, finally. None of my connections leaked, and they actually bled out well. So that's a bit of a surprise, but I'm super pleased with it. So what we have here is master cylinder, brake lines, and proportioning valve from the donor 96 SN95 Mustang. From there, I was able to use the both front lines with a little finagling and stretching and reflaring with the right fitting, and you can see the nice copper line right there. That is all new, so I had to run a completely new brake line all the way from the proportioning valve down across the K-member and all the way to the back. I'll show that to you. The new NICOP line, you can see, comes down from the proportioning valve, goes across, up in there, and then it comes down, goes along the subframe rail, and I just snapped it in. All the old connectors, I had to drill these rivets out and drop this whole bracket down, get the line all in there bent, and then rivet them back up, and it goes, oh dear Gussie, okay, over there. And this is how the donor 96 brakes go. It goes to a Y-block fitting right there on the passenger side, which then is the flex hose, and then there is a line that splits off and goes across there and up to the fitting there for the flex hose for the other side. So that's that. No leaks after bleeding the brakes. I'm happy. And the rear brakes ended up being more than I really wanted to, but it is what it is. These are power stop rotors and pads that I got for about 80 bucks from Rock Auto, and then I actually ended up having to get rebuilt calipers from the parts store. So these are just rebuilt calipers for a 96 Mustang, because the one on this side was locked up and it would not compress all the way. So there's brand new rear brakes. Brakes are freaking done, finally. Man, that was a debacle. Mostly because of parts from the junkyard that were, well, junk. Thanks for that. So I'm gonna snug up all the bolts on the control arms and everything, throw wheels and tires on, back on the ground, and we're ready to go for a drive. Show you real quick. This is how I mounted those brake line brackets. I assume that's about how they're done on the 96. I just drilled a hole for the bolt and drilled a top hole for the tang and used like a self tapper to shoot it into that frame rail. Good. Let's do this. Okay, that is gonna wrap it up for this episode. I will spare you all the math because I added up all the parts to my best recollection of how much I have into the cheapest 5-lug swap, and I could give you all the breakdown and everything, but I'm just going to put it to you like this. It was $1,000. So that includes wheels and tires though, which you can see these are a different set, and we'll get into those later. $1,000 with wheels and tires, front brakes, SN95 brakes, fittings, new brake lines from the front to the rear, new inner and outer tie rods, complete rear axle from a 96 Mustang, and including rebuilding it, and new brakes and new calipers on the rear. So $1,000. Whether I came out good or bad, let me know in the comments. But I did come out cheaper than a brand new set of really nice 4-lug wheels and tires. All brand new, of course. That probably would have been about $1,400. But the big bonus of it is now I have better brakes and I have access to cheaper wheels and tires. The car definitely stops a lot more like it should, and not before, which was pretty sketchy for stock brakes, even with stock wheels and tires and everything. So that's what it is. Where I kind of went wrong was with the rear end. I'll tell you, I probably got about $500 into this V6 rear end with the same guts that the Thunderbird already had in it. So it would have been a better call at this point to just buy a complete 8.8 rear end that was good to go and I could have just put in there. We don't really have those around here though, that's the problem. There is not V8 Mustangs in junkyards around here. So if you live somewhere where you have a lot of stuff like that, good on you. But what we have around here in junkyards is pickups and SUVs, because that's what people drive. So that's it for now. We're just about to get into some upgrades on the Thunderbird, so stay tuned for the next episode. We also have 48 F1 episodes coming up, 78 F-150, and back on the Crown Vic swap also. We got parts coming in for that today. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.